Hi everyone. So I hope that you were able to see the link yesterday and that things were going pretty smoothly. I want to let you know a few of the updates that I've done. First of all, the packet that you all had, I had no electronic version of it because I had made it a couple of years ago and I didn't save it. And then when I updated it this year, I actually worked on narrowing down the margins and things like that so that you guys would have space to do our marginal notes, like in the annotations. And I was playing with the margins so that you guys would have wider margins, and then I didn't save it this year again. So shout out to Kimberly who sent me pictures of what you all had so that then I could retype it one by one and line by line so that it can look as much as what you have as possible. Let me show you the original letter from Birmingham jail. It is in this super tiny font. It is 6 pages long. Very, very, very long. And so the questions that I had originally created were to match these paragraphs, and it was over 20-30 paragraphs. So I know that one of your questions is on paragraph 15, and you guys are messaging me, 2 or 3 students have messaged me that there is no paragraph 15. I spent hours last night retyping this to match with the packet that you guys have, which I'll be annotating with you today. And so essentially, if you just look at the PowerPoint again, I downloaded another one last night around midnight, and that is the one with more updated questions. There isn't anything there with paragraph 15 on it. Don't worry about it, okay? You guys have, I believe, 5 multiple choice questions right now, 2 short response, and then the original short response and the original discussion questions that don't necessarily rely on the original text. Okay, so I hope that clarifies some of the confusion. And then let me just tell you how this is going to be working today. So I'm going to be annotating Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail with you from afar. So I'm going to be annotating my own paper, and I'll be showing you guys I'll be putting up the link of what the screen will look like, paragraph by paragraph. So I'm going to be annotating my own paper. I only have about 15 minutes, I think, to do this. I'm not sure. I just purchased the Premiere version of whatever platform this is. So yesterday I had 15 minutes, and then today I think that it just lets me go as long as I can. I don't know. But I'll be explaining what I'm doing and then posting the audio visual that you guys are seeing now on the YouTube channel that I apparently now have. I'm providing the links one by one as I go through them. So I'll post it in order. If it does cut off time for me, I'm not sure yet, with part 1, part 2, so that way you guys are looking at everything in order. Okay. So, another thing, USA test prep. I uploaded it last night or yesterday, and then a student messaged me with the USA test prep having not shown up. So it didn't go through. I was rethinking doing it anyway, that particular USA test prep. It's about colons, and I haven't taught you about colons yet, so I was a little hesitant. However, I'm trying to give you USA test preps that are about writing. So I found one last USA test prep that I haven't used yet. I've been keeping track of all of your USA test preps on here. Ooh, there you go. With the due dates and everything. And so there were very few USA test preps that were left that actually had to do with writing. And I found one that I felt comfortable giving it to you because we've covered. And it's called Craft Instruction number 6, Nuances. And it's about denotation and connotation. So I felt totally comfortable giving that to you, and I compared to other things on grammar that I just haven't taught yet, that I don't want you to get a low score just because I haven't covered that with you guys yet. Okay, but it's coming up. Okay, bueno, other than that, let's just go ahead and go straight to our annotations. I kind of wanted to begin this by going over some of my favorite quotes and excerpts of Letter from Birmingham Jail that actually didn't make the cut, so to speak, into our version of it. These are so important, but like I showed you, the Letter from Birmingham Jail is long. So I had to make a decision as to what to include, what not to include. But I did want to kind of go over some of the things that were left out because they're just so important. In this paragraph, Dr. King is kind of responding to people who are saying, well, why are you engaging in what is called direct action? Direct action is that you are not doing something from the sidelines, you're not doing something from afar, but rather you are in the moment, present, engaging in some sort of action, whether it be a march, it be a sit-in, it be a protest, it be a strike, it be a boycott, something that is going to directly impact the structure that you're trying to change. And so he said, he brings up the question, why direct action, why sit-ins and marches and so forth isn't negotiating a better path. And in this paragraph, he basically addresses how he needs to create tension. He has to create tension in a society that is fine with the status quo, that is fine with the level of discrimination that Black people and people of color were facing, not only in the rural South, but also throughout the entire country, as the progressive North was really not as progressive as it seemed to be. They had their own systemic ways of discriminating and segregating Black people and people of color. So he says that he needs to create tension in a society that does not value them. And he says that he's opposed to violent tension, but there is a constructive, non-violent kind of tension that they need to focus on in order to force people to look at their demands and to pay attention to their struggle. A struggle that they're very much familiar with because they cause it, but they don't necessarily empathize with. And so there's another part that says, well, you need to time the struggle correct, you need to time your protest correctly. Your direct action campaign has to be well timed. And there's a whole paragraph that we have about waiting, about those who are asking us to wait, which we'll go over. Those who are asking us to wait have never felt the stinging darts of segregation. And that part is in your packet. This is something that is not in your packet, but it's one of the most famous lines of Letter from Birmingham Jail. He says, "For now, I have heard the word wait. It rings true in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurors that justice too long delayed is justice denied." And so when you wait and wait and wait, nothing happens and progress is not made. And actually, the way that I ended your PowerPoint yesterday is with a video from the renowned author James Baldwin, who with his writing and with his incredible skill to articulate the human condition and the human spirit, and not only articulate the need for equality, but also to speak about the need for equity amongst all people. He actually, later in his life, he was being interviewed and he had this great response as to why we shouldn't wait, as to how progress is so slow and so generational that it's actually not progress at all, with how long it is taking. So I highly recommend that you guys watch this very short clip from the brilliant James Baldwin. So that's a famous part of the Letter from Birmingham Jail. And he says, so he gives explanations about enacting or devising laws. he compares the white citizens counselor, or the Ku Klux Klanner, right here. So the white citizens counselor was also a white supremacist hate group, just like the KKK, and he says that he is gravely disappointed. Another very famous excerpt from Letter from Birmingham Jail that isn't in your packet. He said, "I am gravely disappointed with the white moderate." Remember that to be moderate is to not be extreme and also not lacking. So very similar to that word neutral that we learned. You're not on the right, you're not on the left. It's not good, it's not bad, you're just right in the middle. And so he says that for white people who are right in the middle, who they don't disagree with equal rights for other people, but they're not advocating for it either. They're not fighting for it either. He says that those people in the middle, that he is gravely disappointed by them, and that he has reached the almost regrettable conclusion. He says that that black people's greatest stumbling block is not the KKK, who are extremist racists, and it's not the White Citizens Council, again, extremist racist, but actually the white moderate. He is more disappointed in them than he is in the KKK and in the White Citizens Council, because the KKK and the White Citizens Council, you know where they stand, you know what they're going to be about, but it's the people in the middle who you have the ability to be able to try to change their mind that actually are fine with the way that things are. They're fine with it. They don't want to get involved. And he says that the white moderate is more devoted to order, to society remaining in order, than justice. But when the order of society is unjust, then why do you want to preserve that kind of society? And why do you want to preserve that kind of order? And so he's incredibly disappointed in them. And this is where he says positive peace and negative peace that we were talking about yesterday. He says that the white moderate prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, rather than a positive peace, which is justice. And in order for that justice to be present, you have to create the tension in society to break up the order of systemic injustice that is currently present, to then build a society of justice after that. You have to break up the world as we know it in order to build a new one. But the white moderate is the one who just wants order. They just want that negative peace. He said, let me see what else is like a really important part. These are my favorite parts. He said, oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The human spirit and African Americans yearn for a kind of freedom that generationally has been taken away from them. You also have to keep in mind, and I know that I'm not with you over a series of days to explain this to you, but in the 1950s and 60s, you were seeing waves of protests throughout other nations and continents. You were seeing this, and a little bit earlier than the decades that I just mentioned, you were seeing the Dominican Republic undergo a revolution. You were seeing South Africa undergo a revolution of their own as the anti-apartheid movement was happening. You had all throughout throughout several Central American countries, you had like an uprising of black internationalism that was happening throughout the world. And so it's ignorant to think that would not eventually get to the United States. And African Americans, black people, people of color, abolitionists had been protesting for freedom for decades, for years, for centuries, even before the infamous civil rights movement. And so he has said to people, right in this, where is it? He has said to people right here in this paragraph, where the Birmingham police force is being kind of praised for keeping their commitment to order in society and for preventing violence. And he's like, what are you talking about? We are the nonviolent movement. We're the nonviolent movement. The police officers and the police forces throughout the South and in Birmingham that you are praising for them keeping the peace and for them keeping order, actually they are the enablers and the conductors of violence. So he says right here in these great lines when he says, I doubt you would have so warmly commended the police force if you had seen its dogs sinking their teeth into unarmed, non-violent Negroes. I doubt that you would so quickly commend the police if you were to observe their ugly and inhumane treatment of Negroes here in the city jail, if you were to watch them push and curse old Negro women and young Negro girls, if you were to see them slap and kick old Negro men and young boys, if you were to observe them, notice the parallelism there, if you were to observe them as they did on 2 occasions refuse to give us food because we wanted to sing our grace together, I cannot join you in your praise of the Birmingham Police Department. He was an abolitionist. He was someone who did not believe in the police force as it existed to keep peace, truly keep peace for all people. And then he said, instead, I wish that you were, not to commend the Birmingham Police Department, I wish that you were to commend and to praise those who were engaging in sit-ins, those who were demonstrating with courage and with grace their provocation of an unjust society. And so there will be oppressed people, battered Negro women, symbolized in the 72-year-old woman in Montgomery, Alabama, who rose up with a sense of dignity, and her people decided not to ride segregated buses, and who responded with ungrammatical profundity to the one who inquired about her weariness. My feet is tired, but my soul is at rest. And you know who he's referring to. You know that he is making an allusion here to Miss Rosa Parks. And so he's saying, you are uplifting and you're commending the wrong people. Commend the people who are engaging in nonviolent, direct action. And then he actually has a series of paragraphs. Here are just, some of the ones that I included in my favorite excerpts, where he is not only invoking a biblical allusion, but also allusions to seminal documents that we have. And so he said, one day the South will know, when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, that they were in reality standing up for what is best in the American dream and for the most sacred values of our Judeo-Christian heritage, thereby bringing our nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the founding fathers in their formulation of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. And I want, when we get into the I Have a Dream speech, the infamous I Have a Dream speech that was given in the March on Washington for economic justice, he actually breaks down the promises of America, and he refers to more seminal documents that were not listed here. And then he essentially ends it with Christian brotherhood and clergymen. Remember that clergymen are pastors, preachers, fathers of the church, priests. So remember that this is a letter to his fellow clergymen who are saying that he is engaging in practices that they don't approve of, as if he were to need their approval. And he ends up saying, let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away, and the deep fog of misunderstanding about what he's doing as he's sitting in jail in the Birmingham Police Department, will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities, and in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty. And so I wanted to give you guys a greater context that is not in your packet for what he is going to be writing. So with that said, let's go ahead and let's begin to annotate and pray for the best as we do this. Okay, so we're going to start off right here in this paragraph. And he actually begins the letter with this, and he says, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Now, I wanted you guys to know when this was being written. So right after the title, right here, where's my mouse? Right here. Right after the title, I want you guys to go ahead and to put the date that he wrote this, which was April 16, 1963. Okay? Because it's important to note that he is writing this a year before and leading up to what we now know is the Voting Rights Restoration Act. The Voting Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act of 1964. So he's writing this April 16 of 1963, and that's really important to know because it gives us historical context. So he actually begins the letter with letter to my fellow clergymen. While confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely. So what I want you guys to do is I want you guys to go ahead and to underline that quote, okay? Pull it out, and I want you to go ahead and to write down that this is what he is being called by his fellow clergymen. This is what he is being told by his fellow clergymen. Okay. Because there's a difference between the way that the people of Alabama and the way that white politicians talk about him, and the way that his fellow clergymen, not to be redundant, refer to him or say something about what he's doing. So unwise and untimely, again, this is not the time. Seldom, if ever, do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. If I sought to answer all of the criticisms across my desk, my secretaries would be engaged in little else in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill, and your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I want to try to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. So at this point, if you guys notice the tone that he has there, let's go ahead and let's bracket these two lines right here. Okay, let's bracket these two lines, because what I want you to notice is that his tone here, he is placating them, meaning that he's kind of flattering them, and he's reassuring them of the intent that he has moving forward. I believe that you have good intentions. I believe that you are men of goodwill, honest, authentic goodwill, and that your criticisms are sincere and coming from a good place. So he's trying to butter them up a little bit right in the beginning, so that they can be how is it that I'm trying to say it? They can rest assured a little bit in the letter that they're going to be presently reading. So he says, I think I should indicate why I am here in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the view which argues against outsiders coming in. So at this point, let's go ahead and let's underline outsiders coming in right there. Let's pull it out as we normally do. And this is essentially a very southern kind of illusion and mentality, where he believes, sorry, I'm having a hard time lecturing and writing at the same time. He believes, I apologize, he notes that in the South, there's this kind of mentality of we don't want the government to intervene in what we are doing as a state. We don't want someone from the neighboring state to tell us what to do. It's very much like a states' rights kind of argument, where it's only if you are from the South and from a particular state that you have a say in what is happening within your state, which I understand. However, it's that like anti-foreigner, anti-outsider, isolating, exclusionary kind of mentality that tends to be spread throughout the South, going all the way back to the Civil War. And so this outsiders coming in, this kind of xenophobic, anti-foreign kind of mentality, you see it alluded to a little bit here. And also that's just what he's directly called. So this is the Southern mentality that is anti-foreigners. Okay. And then one of the best lines of this entire text is, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. So with your highlighter, I hope you have one with you. So with your highlighter, I want you guys to go ahead and to highlight that. I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. And so that's such a great line because he's bringing awareness to the fact that anywhere that injustice is, he will be there. Any group of people, any community members that are coming together in order to strike, in order to strike in a certain workforce, like the infamous sanitation workers strike that was happening in Tennessee that he went to go see in 1968 or 1967. 1968 or 1967, but it was right before he was assassinated. He went over to Memphis, Tennessee. Let me look that up. I just don't want to give you guys inaccurate information. And my memory is a little off right now. Yeah, Memphis, Tennessee. He went over to Memphis, Tennessee in order to support the sanitation workers that were on strike. And then a few days later, he was assassinated on April 4th of 1968, because the 50-year anniversary was a couple of years ago while I was teaching this text. And he ends up going to Memphis, Tennessee. He ends up, being in Georgia and being in North Carolina, being in Louisiana. You have him show up, not just in Birmingham, Alabama, the most racist city, that, as it was called back then, but you have him anywhere. I am here in Birmingham because injustice is here. So this shows to his level of commitment, to the civil rights movement. And that is just, it's a calling. He's there to lend his platform, his strategy, his hope, his experience, wherever there is injustice, regardless of travel, regardless of whether or not he's an outsider. He says, I am cognizant. Now what we're going to do is that we're going to go ahead and we're going to circle that word. Okay. Any words that we do not know, or that, because I'm not with you, that I can anticipate that there may be a kid sitting in class that may not know what the word is, we're going to go ahead and we're going to circle it. Okay. So right here where it says cognizant, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to circle interrelatedness as well. Cognizant, as we pull it out, we're going to write down aware. Okay. Acknowledge. So I am aware, I acknowledge that there is an interrelatedness. Interrelatedness, we're going to go ahead and we're going to pull it out. And it means when issues or people intersect or So he says, I am aware, I am cognizant of how interrelated all of the communities in the states are. He says, I cannot sit idly by. So idly, that is another word that we're going to go ahead and we're going to circle and we're going to pull out. Okay? To be idle means to not have anything to do. Okay? So, nothing to do. He says, I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta, which is in Georgia. So if you didn't know that, please make sure that you guys include that. Because remember, he's in Birmingham, Alabama. But he was residing in Atlanta, Georgia. Okay? So if you want to, at the very top of your paper, up here, where it says Birmingham, you can go ahead and you can pull out that that is in Alabama. Whereas Atlanta, down here, is in Georgia. Okay, just to keep everyone safe, just to keep everyone kind of like on the same page regarding geography. He says, I can't sit by in Atlanta doing nothing and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. And then this is another line that is very famous that we're going to go ahead and we're going to highlight. He says, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, because all these communities and people and issues are all interrelated. Any injustice that happens to workers in the town next door is going to affect me. Any voting suppression, the fact that your vote is being suppressed, but you don't even have the right to vote, that happens in the county over, can happen to me. Any lack of public education that is afforded to people in the city next door can also affect me and my children, or my children. And so he says anything, because communities and because people and because states are all connected to each other in some way, and I don't mean like by spirit, I mean politically, bureaucratically, institutionally, because it is also interconnected. I know that if there is a threat of injustice there, then it threatens justice anywhere. We can't pretend that we are just disconnected. We're all connected. We're all interrelated. Okay? All right. And then that kind of goes back to the interrelatedness. So go ahead and just draw your arrow over to your interrelatedness comment. So he says, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. Go ahead and circle that word. Mutuality just means that reciprocity. I know that doesn't help. But mutuality is like we are both exchanging something. Okay? When we come to a mutual agreement, we both agree. When we have mutual friends, you and I share a friend. Okay? So it's like an exchange. It's something that you share. Okay? So let's go ahead and write that down. So we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And so let's go ahead and let's take our annotation and let's bring that over to the intersection, to the interrelatedness comment as well. Because again, he's trying to show how everyone and everything in every community is connected to one another. And that they are not, like, what just because it's happening over there isn't my problem. It has nothing to do with me. Actually, it may very well, and it probably is, occurring in your community as well. And that's why you should care. That's why he's here. He's here in Birmingham because injustice in Birmingham, Alabama is a threat to any hope of justice to his home in Atlanta, Georgia. how can you pretend that it's not connected? It's not like people in Atlanta have rights and people in Birmingham, Alabama just don't. Like, no. The lack of rights is happening across the board. So you go to wherever the injustice is. He says, never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. So go ahead and circle that word, provincial. And let's pull it out. It needs to be from a province. That's the root of it. Province, small town. But what he's really saying is not, geographically small town. It's about being small-minded. It's about being ignorant. Okay? So that's what he means. And again, that outside agitator idea of like what he's being called. He's being called an outsider that is coming over here in order to agitate, in order to piss off, in order to provoke and disrupt and cause trouble. And that's what he's here for. And therefore we shouldn't be paying him any attention. He's just here to stir the pot. Absolutely. The pot is poisoned. Like, stir it all day. Throw it out. Make a new one. So, I miss teaching. This is terrible. So he says, anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. So I think that that's such an important annotation to make, because what he is, and you guys can put it like, wherever you have a little bit of space, but he is stressing the idea that being American, and even just being on American land, on American soil, it gives you the right to not be considered an outsider. How can you be an outsider in a country that is yours? How can you be an outsider in a country that you belong to, that you should be made to feel as if you belong to? How can you be an outsider in a country and in a workforce that does not function without you and your people, that runs and that is built on the back of you and your people? When you make the country run, when you make it what it is, how can you be ostracized? How can you be excluded when you are America? So I really appreciate, especially like in the given context that we're in today, I really appreciate this line. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider. How can you be considered an outsider in the country that you're in? So it's just a really beautiful line that I believe that we should appreciate. So let's go ahead and let's write down our notes about that line. I'm writing down my notes for you. It's enough to grant you constitutional rights and human dignity above all else. He talks in the excerpts that I showed you previously, and here in Letter from Birmingham Jail, and in the I Have a Dream speech that we're going to read, he talks about not only your God-given rights, but your constitutional rights. And he talks about like human beings living and being treated with dignity, regardless of citizenship. He says it in I Have a Dream speech. Regardless of citizenship, you have God-given human rights. By virtue of being born, you should be treated with dignity. So just beautiful few paragraphs. Now, I do have to tell you that this paragraph that we're getting into now is a little difficult for me. And remember that, like, when I say that something is difficult, I don't mean in terms of like rigor. I believe that you and I together, like, that we can we can analyze anything. You know, we can do this. You've noticed that the moments that I have said, especially in an ordinary man, especially in an analysis of night, the moments that I have said that something is difficult is because, like, it's ugly and it's hard. So this paragraph definitely has a lot of that. Okay. He says, the very first line, he says, we have waited for more than 340 years for our God-given and constitutional rights. Now, what I want you guys to go ahead and to write down when you pull that out, the 340 years. If you notice, we have like a number there. Not that I'm taking us back to the motif of numbers and stuff like we did with an ordinary man for the Rwandan genocide. But what he's referring to in 340 years is 1619. Okay? In 1619, please make sure that you write it down. In 1619, the first quote-unquote human cargo were brought to the United States. It was 20 Africans that were kidnapped, that were stolen from their land, and those 20 Africans were the first people who were enslaved in the United States. And so when he says, that we have waited for more than 340 years, the time period that he's referring to is the moment that the first enslaved African person was brought here to this country to begin our slave society that we became. So I just wanted you guys to know, like, what he was alluding to. My paper, what he was alluding to for that. Okay? We have waited for more than 340 years for our God-given and constitutional rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward the goal of political independence, but we stiff creep at horse and buggy pace toward the gaining of a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Okay, now, I want you guys to go ahead and to pull out Asia and Africa, because those are illusions. Now, remember in like the beginning of this video when I was telling you about how the civil rights movement was not something that was happening like in a bubble. It was something like, it wasn't just like a unique moment in that only the U.S. was happening. It was actually part of like an international solidarity movement. It was part of this international abolitionism that was happening throughout the world in different communities, in different states, in different countries, against oppression. And so here, the nation of Asia, he's referring to how different colonies that were under the British Empire, how they were actually opposing and protesting British colonial rule. So that is happening over in Asia. Asia has the opposition to British colonization. And we're going to see that actually with our third text that we have. We're going to see like a little bit of the background to that with our Gandhi text, because our Gandhi text was it was set in the 1940s, and this text was written in 1963. So he's referring a little bit to that, you know, the opposition to British colonization, and then also when you have his allusion to Africa, it's about South African apartheid. Please remember that apartheid is A-P-A-R-T. Remember the root word of apartheid being apart. And after apartheid, you have HEID. So it's the South African anti-apartheid movement, where the story that we read once upon a time, towards the beginning, back in the fall, towards the beginning of the year, about the little boy who his parents built a wall in order to keep their house safe, and it had these wires and it had these tall razor pointed fences around it, and the razor wire, the barbed wire, the barbed wire that was around it, and the little boy imagining that he was fighting a dragon. He got caught up in it, and the barbed wire ended up shredding him to pieces. And the very thing that his parents had sought to protect him from black South Africans in the townships, the very poverty-stricken townships of South Africa, and primarily in Cape Town, he ends up being killed by the very means that his parents were using to protect him from black South Africans. And so when we looked at Nelson Mandela earlier in the year, and the fact that he was imprisoned for approximately 30 years for being one of the leaders of the anti-apartheid movement, that he went on to become South Africa's first black president. That is what he's referring to here. You have other nations and other continents who are very quickly opposing their oppression, and they're fighting, and it's working. In hindsight, though, when we look at not only the end of British colonization and the Commonwealth, and when we look at South Africa, this actually happens a few years later. But he doesn't know that as he's writing this. Hindsight is 2020. So he ends up saying the nations of Asia and Africa are moving incredibly quickly with jet-like speed toward the goal of political independence, of being able to advocate for themselves. And here we are, creeping at horse and buggy pace. So I want you guys to go ahead and box, I don't know, jet-like speed versus stiff creep at horse and buggy pace. There we have juxtaposition. He's juxtaposing these two kinds of movements and the speed at which they're making progress. The United States is supposed to be a first world country, a highly industrialized nation, a leader of human rights and champion of democracy, and yet, and that's the perception that it's supposed to have worldwide, especially post World War II, and yet here you are not granting citizenship and constitutional rights, not granting human rights and human dignity to your own people, because you continue to profit from their exploitation and you continue to marginalize them. And so while other nations are moving at jet-like speed towards political independence, over here in America, we're moving at a horse and buggy. This is the juxtaposition of two kinds of modes of transportation. One being very fast and very modern, and the other one being old and very outdated. So you have that modern versus outdated implication. So he says, toward the beginning of a cup of coffee, people are fighting for political independence, and I'm fighting for a cup of coffee at a lunch counter, he's saying. He says, I guess it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. Now, that's what I was talking to you earlier about, how there were people that were saying that this is not well timed. There were people who were saying that you just need to wait for progress to be made. And he's alluding to that here, to those people, to not only black clergymen, but the moderates and black people who were not about engaging in the civil rights movement, and especially white people who were saying wait. He's saying it's easy for you to say wait because you've never felt the stinging darts of segregation. And so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read this incredibly long sentence that is that is syntactically correct and punctuationally correct because of the semicolon. A semicolon allows, and I know that I haven't covered this with you, this was like one of the lessons that we were going to do together. Semicolons allow for independent clauses, for complete sentences, complete ideas to come together like a list and to be included in one major sentence. So I'm going to take a big gulp of water so that I can read all this to you. And now let's go ahead and begin, okay? So we are right here. And we'll begin, okay? I guess it is easy for those of you that have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will, and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, brutalize, and even kill your black brothers and sisters with impunity, circle that word, we'll come back to it, okay? With impunity. When you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, circle affluent. When you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she cannot go to the amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see the depressing clouds of inferiority begin to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort, circle that if you need it, and see her beginning to distort her personality by developing an unconscious bitterness toward white people. When you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son asking an agonizing pathos, circle pathos, Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean? When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep at night, night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs that read white and colored. When your first name becomes N-word and your middle name becomes Boy, however old you are, and your last name becomes John, and your wife and mother are never given the respected title of Mrs. When you are constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect, and are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments. When you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. All right, let's go ahead and in each one of the complete thoughts, in between the semicolons, they are divided by the semicolons, we're going to go ahead and we're going to put the topic there. Okay, so when he says in the very first set of colons, right here, when you have seen the vicious moms lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, that line is referring to lynching. Violence. He then carries this idea over in the next line when he says, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, brutalize, and even kill your black brothers and sisters with impunity, Impunity means no punishment. Impunity means that you can get away with it. Okay? So the topic here is police brutality. Violence. Impunity means no punishment. Okay? And the next line, when you see a vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, the topic there is poverty. And that image is just, it's so accurate. A cage of poverty, not allowed to escape. You're not afforded any opportunity for high-paying jobs. People who are less qualified than you get that opportunity afforded to them for them to be able to move on up. There's no mobility, no professional mobility, and no education opportunities, or very little education opportunities to pair with a skill set. So even if you could, you can't move up, and you can't because of what has not been afforded to you. So you have the airtight cage of poverty. And then affluent means wealthy. So you are, imagine it, like you are in an airtight, cannot breathe, cannot escape, which is really really powerful imagery. Can't breathe or escape. But you can look around you everywhere and see a wealthy society, see a wealthy nation. You can see it, but it's not for you. You are locked in this cage. You can see it, but you can't touch it. You're creating the wealth with your labor, but the wealth is not meant for you. So he has like a really impactful way of describing how people were economically choked. In the next one, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted, this one is so sad. I think that is not that everything else in here isn't enraging, but it's just that, like, it's a little girl, and it's a little boy, and when her father tries to explain to her the topic in this line of discrimination. Let me see. When she cannot go to the public amusement park. So the public amusement park is discriminating. So I would go ahead and I would underline public amusement park and put the topic there as discriminating. But then also right here, depressing clouds of inferiority, distort. For people who needed the word distort, it means to warp. Okay? And so the topic here is not only about discrimination, but the topic is also about, like, what happens to the human spirit when you feel like you are inferior. When you are made to believe that there is something wrong with you, and that's why you're not allowed. When you're made to feel less than. I mean, that's what inferior is, right? When you are made to feel less than and not enough and not worthy. And so what does that do to the human spirit when, as a child, you begin to internalize these ideas and concepts that not your parents gave you, but that society has imposed upon you by the mere fact that they are discriminating against you for no reason other than your identity. Not because of what you've done, but because of who you are as a person, what you were born as. So I think that the other topic that is here is about the human spirit. the human spirit becomes warped. The human spirit becomes distorted. The human spirit becomes kind of tainted. And that line, you know, you see tears well up in her eyes, and you can see the depressing little clouds begin to form in her little mental sky as she develops a sense of inferiority. And then unconsciously, as she begins to develop a bitterness towards white people. So this segregation not only harms people, black people and people of color, but it also harms white people because of attitudes that are now created against them based on the attitudes that they have against people of color, black people and people of color. So it harms people on both sides. And James Baldwin, that author that I was telling you about, does a really good job of explaining that segregation harms both sides. So yeah, let's look at the one with the little boy with his son. When you have to concoct an answer, to concoct, to create, to come up with, in case you guys didn't, if you wanted to circle that one, concoct is to create, to come up with. An answer for a 5-year-old son, asking agonizing pathos. Agonizing, if you guys didn't know, it means painful, it means anguish. Pathos is one of the 3 rhetorical devices that tend to be put together: pathos, logos, ethos. Pathos comes from passion, but really it's about an emotion-based response. Okay? And so it doesn't necessarily mean passion, passionate. It means pathos is rooted in passion, but it's really referring to emotion. You're making of the 3 appeals, you're making an emotional appeal, not a logical appeal, logos, not an ethical appeal, ethos. You're making an emotional appeal. And so when his little boy looks up at him and asks him, why do white people treat colored people so mean? What do you say to that? How do you as a parent, and I'm not a parent, you know that, but how do you as an adult who cares about this little person, who is responsible for creating for bringing up this little person and for, trying to help them become their best self, how do you explain that to a little girl? And how do you explain that to a little boy that are trying to find the language and are trying to understand this level of systemic segregation and institutional discrimination? And there's no logic behind it. There's nothing but bias and prejudice and bigotry and xenophobia and no actual logic and reason behind it. So we see that in that independent clause. In the next one, the topic in the previous one, I apologize. The topic in the previous one is again about discrimination and segregation. Now, in the next one, obviously it's about housing. So when you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you, that one is about accommodation. Accommodations, housing. We can put it under that category, even though housing generally refers to apartments and homes, complexes, things like that. But this is a motel, but it's under that same umbrella of accommodation, of residency. The next one, it says, when you're humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white and color. So this is about, again, that segregation. And that segregation is also a labeling of, you have the labeling to show you what is it that white people are worthy of, and what is it that quote-unquote colored people are supposedly worthy of. Here's the mode of transportation for you, and here's the mode of transportation for you. Here's your side of the restaurant, and here's our side of the restaurant. Here is your school, here is my school. Here is, one of the infamous images from the Jim Crow South is the water fountain and all that. Here is yours with clean water, and here is someone, quote unquote colored people, with a rundown water fountain that barely works. And so it's that constant humiliation, that constant reminder, and the labeling, not just by the utility itself, but by the condition in which that utility is in, is the constant reminder of your worth. So that labeling parallels the worth that is being communicated to people. In the next one, when he says, when your first name becomes N-word and your middle name becomes boy, so no matter however old you are, so even if you were an older gentleman, even if you were a grown man, people younger than you, white people younger than you, would still call you boy. And so, and this, was predominant in the South, in the Jim Crow South. And so what you notice there is that there's no respect for elders. It doesn't matter how old you are, how wise you are, how much you have contributed to society. You are a boy, you are a child, you are lacking in expertise, in experience, in value than I. We really don't need to go into the first one. You know that the first one is a racial slur. The boy is about keeping you in your, reminding you of your place. So again, imagine a 25-year-old young white man saying to a 65-year-old African-American man, calling him boy, and how disrespectful that is. You have a 25-year-old calling a 10-year-old boy, no matter his race, and you get that he's a boy. But a 65-year-old or, anyone that is a grown person, an elder especially, being called boy is a sign of disrespect. And then your last name becomes John. So John is a very dismissive, anonymous, you have no name, you are the name that I give you. You are just like an average, everyday person. I don't need to know your name. So like John Q. Public, John Smith, John Doe. Same thing with Jane Smith and Jane Doe. But you are a throwaway, essentially. And then when your wife and your mother are never given the respected title of Mrs. So we have with the Mrs., we have disrespect. With John, we have throwaway. And then just overall, in that entire independent clause, what you have is rhetoric. The rhetoric of devaluing people. The rhetoric of dehumanization. All of this is dehumanizing. All of this is dehumanizing. But here's the language behind it. The next independent clause. Right down here, there you go. When you are harried by day, I forgot to circle that one for you. So harried means to be like frantic and kind of like run down. Okay. Frantic, run down. When you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro living constantly at a tiptoe stance, never knowing quite what to expect, and are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments. I apologize, I went a too far. Right there. Okay. So the tiptoe stance, we're going to go ahead and we're going to label that as a topic of anxiety. And then plagued with inner fears, obviously, is about the constant state of fear. So imagine living, I know that right now, like we are in a pretty unique moment where we don't know what's going to happen next, right? Imagine that being your life for no other reason than because of your race and the society that you live in. You live in a constant state of anxiety because you don't know what is going to happen next. You have to always walk on eggshells. You have to always walk at a tiptoe stance, being careful with what you say and what you do and how you look at someone, that it could be interpreted the wrong way. Please remember Emmett Till. Please remember, this 14-year-old boy who supposedly whistled at a white woman. And you guys saw that in the first 13 minutes of 13th. Supposedly whistled at a white woman, and this white woman told her husband, and her husband and his friend ended up kidnapping this boy and beating him to the point where his face was unrecognizable and killing him. And his mother, his poor mother, actually ended up agreeing, and she wanted to. She actually ended up having an open casket for everyone to come and see what had been done to her child. That is what I mean by not knowing what's going to come next. Actually a few years ago, 2, maybe 3 years ago, that white woman who accused Emmett Till of whistling at her, looking at her provocatively, all that, she confessed to a reporter. She confessed that she had made it all up. So that's enraging. And that's also very, very much a picture of America, where just the thought that Black people of color at the time would, in the eyes of a white person, step out of line and not remember their place. And the violence, not only the institutional and systemic, bureaucratic, political violence that was already being enacted on people by systems of segregation and modes of discrimination on a daily basis in everything, in housing, in public education, in utilities, in transportation, and everything. But then it's also the very physical and real violence that could happen at any moment, for any given time. The level of anxiety that creates, the level of fear that you carry in your body, in your mind, every day. And so that's what that particular independent clause is talking about. Right here, the next one, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness. So, just going to switch over my notes. When you're forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness. Again, that is, the words generating means to break down gradually, over time, without a cure. So what is it that you are breaking down, or that is being broken down gradually over time without a cure? That sense of nobodiness. That sense of having no worth. Of not being human. Of not belonging, of not being someone. That lack of dignity. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to write that down. For nobodiness. Not being valued. Of worth. Not belonging. Not being seen as someone. As a person. Not being seen as a person. Having no dignity. So he gives all of these topics in a very long sentence that is still syntactically correct because of his use of the semicolon from beginning to end. And so I'm just going to review that real quick with you from the beginning. I guess it is easy to say for those that have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say wait. But when you have seen the lynching and the violence, the police brutality, the violence, the poverty that you can't escape, and that causes you to feel like you can't breathe, the discrimination, the human spirit becoming tainted, the segregation, the lack of accommodation, the constant labeling that signals your worth, the racial slurs, the reminding of what your place in society is, the disrespect, the rhetoric of devaluing and of dehumanization, the constant feeling of anxiety, the constant state of fear, and you being broken down gradually over time with a sense of not being valued and not belonging and having no worth, and not having any dignity, not being treated like a person or considered a person. When you go through all that, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. So he uses this parallelism and he uses the semicolons in order to break down all of these different institutional, systemic, bureaucratic, personal references of discrimination and dehumanization that make the idea of waiting for a better time to fight for civil rights sound ridiculous, sound impossible. I have nothing else to add to that because it was so much. He says, here comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over. I want you guys to go ahead and to pull cup of endurance out because that is actually a biblical allusion. When you many times in the Bible you have, and he's a preacher. Please remember that Dr. King is, doctor aside because of a doctorate, like his doctorate degree in theology. Like, he is a preacher. You can hear it in his voice. You can hear it in the way that he talks. You can hear it taught. You can hear it in the way that he communicates with people and that he writes. He has the ability to reach people. And so, many times in the Bible, it says, my cup runneth over. Meaning that my cup is full and overflowing. And he says right here, there comes a time when the cup of endurance, me being able to put up with, me being able to continue is what endurance means. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over. And men are no longer willing to be plunged into an abyss. An abyss, as we circle and we go ahead and we pull that out, an abyss is a deep, dark, never-ending, it seems, hole. You just keep falling and falling and falling, and you don't know where it ends. Men are no longer willing to be plunged into an abyss of injustice, where they can experience the blackness of corroding despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. So again, he's reminding people why waiting is no longer an option. So we go ahead and we pull that out. He said, and this is like where your quick rate question comes from, is alluding to. He says, you express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern, since we so diligently urge people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 outlawing segregation in public schools. Okay, so before we move forward, I want us to go ahead and to pull that out. The Supreme Court decision of 1954. That one is talking, as many of you know or should know, the Brown v. Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas. it is illegal, that separate is not equal, in fact, and that it is illegal to segregate children based on the color of their skin. And so, not only children, young adults as well. These you are young adults. And so, it outlawed the segregation of public schools, and it advocated for integration. However, the creation of a law and the implementation, like the intent of a law and implementation of a law, creation and enforcement of a law are two different things. The law can intend and can demand that schools be integrated, but that wasn't happening across the South. That wasn't happening in even schools in the North. It was because of this Supreme Court decision that there had to be mandatory busing from black students into white schools and white students into black schools, and I mean, like, it forced integration. And then came, people like Ruby Bridges, and came the horrible protests that happened all across America, where people were saying that if we put our children together, we're going to create, and I quote, a mongrel nation of new children. I'm talking about like the mixing of races, that it will create mongrels. As you remember, oh wait,